I wanted to know if you had an opening message to the people who have come to hear from you, Mr. Secretary, in this time when the emergency seems to be abating, but after everything that we've seen, and you've stood so solidly by us for the last more than 2 years.
Oh, no, you need not my message. It's lovely that you all came out. It is so wonderful to be around friends who love the nation of Israel in the same way that I do and my family does. I'm Christian, but I understand the deep tie between these two faiths, and that the importance of the existence of the proper homeland of the Jewish people doesn't escape any of us. And we need to fight for that in every way that we can, intellectually, diplomatically, militarily when necessary. And you all have been so deeply supportive of all of that. And it's funny, Benjamin, when I got that much applause tonight, it makes me very nervous when it's before I speak. But no, it is great to be with you all. We will all stay strong and will prevail. I'm confident of that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, it's an honor. I've said it. I hope that you know it. I think that this is the third or fourth time I've had the privilege of learning from you by way of having the occasion to ask you some questions. And I look forward to having my education continued once again tonight. So I want to dive right in with regard to the Republican Party. I want to ask you about your view of what is taking place within the Republican Party. And I'm asking, just to declare my hand, were I to be an American, I would be voting on that side of the aisle, okay? Without any question whatsoever. It's because I'm from that side of the aisle that I'm concerned about what seems to be taking place in some of the chattering classes within the party, to name individuals such as Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, influencers online. They have taken a view on Israel and the Jewish people that I, as someone from the land of the BBC, never encountered during my upbringing in once Great Britain, ever.
Yes.
And I would like to know just a couple of points about that. Number one, how well positioned do you feel that the Republican Party is to stamp out this tendency? I can assure you the vast majority of people in this room are very uneasy about it.
Yeah.
And the second question that I'd like to ask is, what is the future of the Republican Party, in your estimations, on the subject of Israel and the American Jewish community? And perhaps in addition.
Yeah, two good questions. I'm worried about it too, because you can see it, and it's different from when I came to Congress. I was elected in 2010, began my service in Congress in January 2011. You would have heard none of this. And maybe that overstates it. There's always been a little pocket, right? There's a history of isolationism, which often goes hand in hand. It would be the same handful of characters. So I am worried about it because it's gained traction. It's gained traction, I'm most disconcertingly, among young people. So the folks who served alongside me, who are now 10, 12, 14, 16 years into the time in Congress, I don't think you'd find any of them who'd have views that are at all different than the views that they held 10, 15, 20 years ago. Radically pro-Israel, understanding the deep relationship with the United States and Israel matters to the American people. No difference. What you see is folks like Tucker Carlson have grabbed a hold of in their podcasts too many people that hold a conservative understanding, a conservative conception of America. And so I'm worried about it. Having said that, it's also still small. It gets a lot of play. It gets a lot of noise. They are loud. But you see this in actual votes. You see this in actual delivery of outcomes. You can see that it is a very small minority. My worry is that it will catch fire, that these embers will grow into something that is bigger. And that's the responsibility of folks like myself and others who understand that this is both dangerous and evil, and a fundamental misconception of American security, to think that somehow there can be any better friend, any other ally than the nation of Israel. And so it runs parallel. Anti-Zionism, antisemitism run in parallel. And we need to speak, as was said earlier, we need to speak with absolute moral clarity that this is unacceptable inside of our own party, and call these individuals out whenever they say something that is disconnected from what we know to be fundamental and true and moral.
It does seem to me, though, that the Republican Party is going to have a little bit of a fight with itself with regard to its own identity. There seems to be an isolationist wing that's emerging, and then there's a more outward-facing wing.
Yeah.
How do you see that going with regard to Israel?
Yeah, no, it's very real. I separate this between the issues with this isolationism, or this idea of somehow America alone can work as a security matter for America. I'm perfectly happy to defend what President Trump portends as America first. I consider the work that I did for 4 years as his Secretary of State and CIA Director to have fundamentally put America first. But any conception that we can do that without friends, partners, and allies, whether that's diplomatically or militarily, is just foolish. And second, the conception that we as Americans don't have an enormous obligation to lead the world is a mistake. And I can say that full-throatedly. When you raise your right hand to defend the United States of America, no place else, no other peoples. But goodness gracious, you can't possibly do that without understanding that American leadership is expensive. The burden to lead globally has huge costs that come with it. I'm not even talking about dollars. They come with huge costs in terms of sending our young men and women to fight and risk their lives in places. They come with a conception of leadership that sometimes we have to sacrifice our own economic best interests to get to a secondary outcome. But what I think my fellow Republicans who miss this, I think what they miss is who benefits from that more. The benefits far exceed those costs for the United States. We are so enormously privileged to have this opportunity to lead the world, and that's the argument that we have to make. And I'm convinced that we will. There will be big fights. We remember this goes back a long ways. It goes back to, in my lifetime, Pat Buchanan, right inside of our own party. So it's not new in that sense. We just have to constantly remind ourselves that President Reagan had the model right for our party, and that defending the rights of individuals around the world and for human dignity for all is something that's been at the center of the American idea since our very conception now almost 250 years ago.
And so you're of the view that the power that's needed in order to keep the party in accordance with the views and the standards that are synonymous with you, quite frankly, that those powers will prevail and are there.
Yeah, look, it never comes easy. And by the way, I watch President Trump, who I proudly worked for 4 years. I watch him sometimes conflate what's going on in Ukraine and forget that the victims are the young children sitting in Kyiv and sitting in Odessa, and not the people that are sitting in Russia and Vladimir Putin. I watch him dangerously conflate that, and that's the idea. We have to remember, it's when I see these chants on campuses, I'm going to jump back and forth, but see these young people talking about Hamas, right? Did anybody think Hamas is going to lay down their weapons voluntarily? I mean, it's not. They're a resistance movement by definition. This requires resistance, and the folks who lead nations like Russia, it's not Vladimir Putin. I spent way too much time with Vladimir Putin. I think about that time and think I could have been with my son, he's not going to change. And by the way, if there's a ceasefire while we sit in this room, he's not going to change. If there's a ceasefire that extends in Gaza, Hamas they're not going to change their idea. Hezbollah's leaders aren't going to change their stripes. And so that requires eternal vigilance, real hard work, and a fist that is powerful enough to deter these folks from doing what took place on October 7th and what happened in Europe in February of 2022, when a fifth of Ukraine that had already fallen was at risk of falling even further. And the basic freedoms of those people there, Christians and Jews alike sitting inside of Ukraine, was challenged by an aggressor. We can't let that happen. And my party has been the central feature of American political action that has delivered and defended that for an awfully long time. And we can't walk away from it. I think we'll get to the right place, but it's going to take a whole bunch of us, not just me, a whole bunch of us reminding ourselves about why that matters to America.
There seems, you just mentioned President Trump and this conflation, and I think something that's of concern to people in the room. I know it's of high concern to Israelis, to we who live in Israel and we watch the Israeli media. There does seem to be a very transactional nature to diplomacy. And I think about the approval of the F-35s to the Saudis as an example, in the absence of normalization, which was seen as the quid pro quo that Israel was hoping to get from that. I see, by the way, the manner in which Al-Sharaa is welcomed into the White House. I frankly couldn't believe what I was seeing there. Be that as it may, how confident can Israel be that with this rise of the anti-Israel voices in the party? We know about the left, we've known about the left for a long time, or let me recalibrate. Sane people have known about the problem on the left for a very, very long time. But it's now on the right.
Yeah.
How sure can we be that the state of Israel, just come through a war on 7 fronts, is going to have its QME, the qualitative military edge, ensured, is going to be able to sustain itself in light of this transactional diplomacy so proximate to our borders?
Yeah. No, it is the case President Trump is transactional in that sense. It is equally the case that there has been no greater defender, no president's been a greater defender of Israel as well, in action.
Yeah.
Be careful. Somebody asked me, like, how did you manage to survive 4 years with President Trump? And I said, I learned to listen a lot. It's like my marriage, it's the same. And all the husbands are nodding their heads. You should know. I can see it. Look, President Trump will say things, but I always watch the through lines of his actions. And I have sensed, whether it began with the decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and the through lines for the first 4 years, I haven't seen any of that change with President Trump in his second term. I mean, the fact that he took the strike on Fort Al is something that can't think of another president that would have done that. A Republican or Democrat, for that matter, right? President Bush had declined to strike at Osirak, right? There's been a long line of presidents who would, and President Trump did. So I'm not worried about that. As for QME, I was in the middle of a number of discussions on QME when the Emiratis joined the Abraham Accords and whether they would be able to get the F-35. And I have to be a little careful about the complexities, but I was always confident, as was the Israeli military leadership, who was in deep conversation all along, that they were confident that they still had the tools that they needed if this all went a different direction. And so while I was not privy to the conversations around the discussion with the Saudis in this term, I'm still confident that it will happen. The last thing I do want to say about this is, and this is maybe central because you asked a couple of questions in there, this idea of normalization became the Abraham Accords. I wish I could say we drew it up on a board and we planned it and it worked perfectly. That is not how it came to be. It grew, right? It was proper, and these nations were ready to formally recognize Israel. I am confident that is a one-way ratchet. I truly believe this because I think each of them, and whether it's the Saudis or the other large Islamic populations. We always focus on the Middle East, but think Indonesia, think Malaysia, think Pakistan. They also understand the trajectory. They get the storyline. And I am confident that 20 years from now, there will be even more nations that have formally recognized Israel, and nearly every one of those nations will have done all of the indicia of recognition, whether they did so formally or not. That is, they will be engaged with them diplomatically, they will be engaged with them economically. It's in their best interest to do so. And so I actually think we've figured that out, and that they have figured that out. Last thought on this. There remains a dangerous actor in the Middle East. It's the leadership of Iran. By the way, I always try to disclose when I have a conflict of interest. They're still trying to kill me. So I am not agnostic about the leadership in Tehran. If we can collectively all focus our energy on continuing to destroy any capacity they have and give the Iranian people a shot at something that's fundamentally different, then we increase the probability that my previous statement was right about Israel's fundamental security in the region and its ability to live its life in peace, and the Jewish people there to live their lives in peace.
Firstly, I'm terribly sorry. I know that you said that and people laughed, and I know why people laughed.
Yeah, no,
but, you know,
by the way, we laugh about it too. There's $1 million bounty on my head, and my wife was like, I think it's a little low, but you know. So yes, so we must laugh. Yes.
Yeah, we have to laugh, but of course, for many reasons, the obvious being mentioned, but I want to make sure they never touch you, because I'm hopeful that you will one day be President Pompeo. That is my hope. So in the military, you're a veteran of service. You served as an officer. I'm just going to share a little phrase in Hebrew with you. When we carry our grenades, we hold them in our combat vests, hafuch al hafuch, which means we invert them upside down, then we hold the pin close to our chest. So it's upside down on upside down. So giving a little bit of upside down on upside down logic for a moment, we saw that the idea was that the Saudis were drawing closer. If you remember, just before October 7th, there was the statement, we're drawing closer every day to normalization, and now we see it's being distanced. And I wonder if hafuch al hafuch, upside down on upside down, they're distanced because they know that the nuclear threat that was pushing them ever closer to the orbits of Israel has been greatly, greatly reduced. In other words, might Israel be a victim of her own success militarily and the great partnership with the United States around Midnight Hammer? And that's why we're seeing this resistance.
It's a fair question. I don't think it's likely. No one is fooled. I was in Israel last week. I was in the Middle East 2 weeks before that. I actually, you mentioned Al-Sharaa. I met Al-Sharaa in Riyadh. It was kind of awkward because when I went up to introduce myself and shake his hand, his look said, "You were trying to kill me." Like, it's true, I was. I've lived a strange life. I think two things. One, I think the Saudis will continue to move in this direction. It is a very complicated, for the Crown Prince, it is a very complicated domestic political dynamic. What we should remember, I identified him as the Crown Prince. His father's still alive. We forget because his father's not well and the Crown Prince is clearly in charge, but his father's still alive. There are still things that I think need to play out for formal recognition to take place, but I'm confident that it'll happen. I actually hope it happens soon, because I actually think President Trump makes that increasingly likely. And I don't know who will be the follow-on to President Trump. I think President Trump's presence there increases the probability that the Saudis will do that for a host of reasons. Second, I mentioned Al-Sharaa, and you were talking about keeping your grenade close. We need to keep our eyes on him as well. He was an Al-Qaeda senior leader, the reason there was a U.S. bounty on his head. I'm hopeful. As a Christian, we believe in conversion, but eyes wide open. And I think the Israelis get that. I think the Americans get that too. I hope the Middle Easterners do. They have to place a bet. Someone has to figure out how to try to put a Syria that is deeply broken at risk from Qatar and Turkey coming down to dominate. Someone has to step in to try and make it less at risk of becoming an extremist or continuing down the extremist path that Assad had it on. They've decided Al-Sharaa is the most likely person available to do that. I don't think anybody believes it's Thomas Jefferson reincarnated.
Right.
I certainly don't. But, opportunity, and we'll see if something can be pieced together. I worry about the other pieces. I worry about Doha. I worry about Ankara gaining footholds there that are closer, more capable on the Israeli borders in ways that present real risk.
I'm going to come to that in a moment. You're referring, obviously, to the International Stabilization Force. And if I can ask you a question that essentially is a prelude to that. I came back from my own service inside Gaza. There are many, many soldiers who did everything that I did and so much more during this war. I've seen wars before. I saw the Second Lebanon War and the mass bombings of various areas, so I know what the destruction looks like. I've never seen destruction that's as extensive as what's taken place in Gaza, and as extensive as it is, Mr. Secretary, I believe it to be justified, equally justified and correct and appropriate. But I mention that because there seems to have been, I am firmly of the view that the only way we will know quiet on our border is for the facilitation of the relocation of those Gazans who wish to leave the Gaza Strip. And there was an effort to compel Egypt to absorb the Gazans, and it went nowhere. You made mention of the Saudis and the complexity domestically of managing the relationship with Israel. And it seems that Sisi hides behind the idea that, well, he would never have support for absorbing the Gazans among the Egyptian street, which I think is total nonsense, but that's only my view. Why was Israel and America, including when the president spoke very overtly about that very idea, not able to leap on that initiative and bring all of the diplomatic and transactional heft to play in order to bring about a long-term quiet by placing the Gazans elsewhere?
I try to think of my time as Secretary of State and things that people were more committed to preventing. I can't think of anything other than the Jordanians and the Egyptians' dire statements that says we can't take one Gazan. I actually think that it's very telling. I think it tells you about how deeply troubling, broadly speaking, the Gazan population is, right? Not just the folks who are formerly card-carrying members of Hamas. I think this tells you that they know, like these are all people with a bias towards extremism and terrorism. And I say all, the young kids, but right, educated, deeply ingrained in their philosophical understanding of their place in the world. And so I think that's it. I think there was no discussion to be had. And that was certainly true on my watch as well. You would raise it and they would say, not a finger, not one, not ever, no how. We would proffer putting them in outlying regions, places away from Cairo, away from the... It was as rigid a stance. And I think I appreciate it, or at least I accepted it more from the Jordanians, given their history and its proximity, than I did with the Egyptian leadership. But we made no progress during my time, and I would guess that we leaned on them pretty hard and made zero progress. Maybe there was more leverage and we could have done it, but clearly that wasn't the path that was taken. It remains to be seen what path will be taken. I know you're going to ask about the stabilization force. So many nations have said they're prepared to go in. No one's willing to go in and kill Gazan. I haven't seen any nation that says, I will put my forces in Gaza, and when the Gazans cross a agreed to principle, we will provide actual security. There's no one. The only nation that's prepared to do that to date is Israel. And I don't expect to see that change. And so I think what we're seeing today, I think you're seeing the answer. Everybody's like, what will it be like? It's like, we're in it. And it is with the Israelis still having to do the heavy lifting and the hard work to get to something that's as close to Hamas disarmament as you can possibly get. And every time I hear, I've heard folks in the Trump administration, the Biden administration talked about this often, that we're going to reform the Palestinian Authority. It makes me want to pull out my remaining hair. Yes.
Right. Well, on the ISF, this International Stabilization Force, that really the long-term ceasefire essentially rests. It's a very odd group of strange bedfellows. You have the notion that the Turks will send forces there. They're obviously patrons and protectors of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. You have the Qataris, who are the very same. You have the Egyptians, who might be part of this force, who absolutely revile and despise Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. And we as Israelis and Jews, and as American Jews who have our eyes affixed towards Israel, we're horrified by the idea that we'd be asked to outsource any of our security to any one of those components, let alone those components in an adversarial role. How on earth would such a force possibly work?
Yeah, it won't.
It won't work.
Yeah, it won't work. I don't think Israel will outsource their security to any entity, regardless of how it's comprised, how it's made up. Second, I would be very surprised if, President Trump may put some pressure on, but I'd be very surprised if the Israelis will let any Turkish forces move into Gaza. That would surprise me a great deal. And I hope that there'll be a different solution. I've seen other nations say that they'll sign up. Some of the folks in Central Asia, there was another Asian nation that stepped forward originally and said they would. But these are going to be these are going to be blue helmets, right? They're not going to be formally part of the UN. They're going to be, we will go do peacekeeping, but they haven't demonstrated even a willingness to date to say we identified a breakage of the agreement and then call these races. They literally just want to walk around on street corners and do very little. So I don't see the path forward for a stabilization force. I actually think the stabilization force is headquartered in Jerusalem, but perhaps there's better diplomats than I that can pull that off.
A little different subject. What's the chemistry like between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump?
I haven't been privy to it the last 10 months, but I saw it in the first 4 years. You have two type A personalities. Master of understatement, yes. But the relationship was fine. And it would flare up because there were times when there were just differences in priorities and interests. It is very natural. And then they turn to folks like myself and Ron Dermer and others like fix it. Make it look right. But no, the relationship was great. I mean, President Trump didn't have to be coaxed into moving the embassy or recognizing the Golan Heights as the rightful real estate that belongs to the Jewish people in Israel, or the strike on Soleimani. It wasn't. I often am credited like, Mike, you surely were the power behind the throne driving that. Maybe a little bit, but I mean, I wasn't running into a stone wall or opposition. It was I had a willing participant in trying to understand like what's the best way to deliver this security, and so I'm sure the relationship's still fine. I think President Trump did reach a point where he felt like it was becoming politically difficult to continue the campaign in Gaza. I think he viewed that rightfully. He was thinking about it from the Israelis' perspective. Whether he was right or wrong or not, it's a different question. But I think he was staring at it from an Israeli perspective and thought, hey, they're locked into this and they've done enough. And I think he thought he had a path to get the hostages home. And it was at that point that I think he did put pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to relieve some of the forces that he had deployed. And blessedly, we did get a bunch of the hostages home. Not all of them alive, sadly, but we got them all home.
Does Bibi know how to stand on his principles and say, like the Egyptians and the Jordanians will say, not on our watch? Does the Prime Minister do the same?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about the strikes that were taken on Iran. It would not, I don't know. So I can speak about this freely since I don't know. No risk of me spilling classified information. I'm going to guess that he presented a plan to the Americans about what they were going to do in Iran, as opposed to seeking permission. I would also speculate that he did not get told, no, you can't do that. So yeah, I think he knew how to stand his ground. I think he knew this was necessary, and I think he was determined to do that regardless of how the United States had responded. And then it went well. It went amazingly well. I think I told someone earlier I was in Israel and got a chance to get a briefing on the Israeli Air Force operations from the Israeli perspective. That's as good an operation as humanity has ever seen. Really is.
So that's actually a nice segue. I just have a couple more questions, if I may, Mr. Secretary. I know you have to depart soon enough, and you've been extremely gracious. But I do want to hit a couple of last topics, 2 or 3 of them. You mentioned about the efficacy of that operation inside Iran, but what's there is a very clear, profound degree of intelligence sharing between the Americans and the Israelis, including for the benefit of the security interests of the United States. We understand that there's a great benefit for Israel and its security, but it's less understood as to how the Israeli relationship is so impactful and necessary for the benefit of American security considerations. And there is no one I know who is better placed than you, who I could ask to just give some idea, some example of how that comes to fruition in real time. How close is the intelligence sharing? How important is it for America?
It's absolutely essential for American security. The Israeli intelligence services are world class. I'll tell a quick story. I think I'd been the CIA director for 48 hours, and it was clear from the campaign that President Trump was going to want to have good intelligence and work on problems in the Middle East. And so when I became CIA director, I flew to Israel. I met with my counterpart, Yossi, who was Yossi Cohen, head of Mossad at the time. And there's always a little bit of tension between Mossad and the CIA. We think we're good, they think they're good. Truth is, both are, but there's always a little bit of tension, and they're loath to share everything, and for good and valid reasons. So I went and when I saw Yossi, by the way, Yossi Cohen, like the best looking spy in the world. Like, and so as my wife would always say, we should spend more time with him, honey. So I went to see him, and I literally said to him, I said, Yossi, we're going to do great things together. Your prime minister, my president's going to ask us to do really good work. We have to make sure that our teams are not fighting each other. They're working together. And so I went and met with some of his senior leaders. He flew back to Langley and met with my senior leaders. We laid down the law. We said we're going to work closely together. One of the most important things I did during my 4 years was that set of meetings. By the way, I always joked with him. I'm like, it's great, Yossi. We're huge. We're global. We're all over the world. And you have no lawyers. We're perfect together. So you can do lots of things we can't do. So we're gonna make magic. It is so important for America to get that right. And the good news is, I think that cooperation was ongoing before my time and continues to this day.
Do you think it continues regardless of who is in the White House? Does it transcend that?
It does transcend that at the operational level. Mm-hmm. Mike, I would guess, having only experienced it with one president, but I would guess that other times it's much more cautious at the grand strategic level because the two leaders have to trust each other and trust that when that time comes, when there's a hard thing to do, that the United States won't cause a problem for something that Israel wanted to do, or conversely, the Israelis won't use some intelligence to sort of shape something in a way. So I'm sure it's different, but I think at the operational and tactical levels, I think it's pretty consistent.
So,
by the way, we now have, think of this too, we now have more than 100 Americans on the ground in Israel. First time we've had that. It kind of got overlooked in all the news. I get it, it's a loud news environment. Believe me, I get it. That's really quite something. And I would guess that will actually enhance the capacity for cooperation as well. The fact that there are now large numbers. There's always been exchanges between our intelligence programs, but I think that will actually make that cooperation even deeper and more important and more useful.
You don't think it will impede our freedom of movement?
I don't think so.
Okay. Because we're concerned about that.
I've heard this. I can't imagine. I literally, when I think about October 7th and the ramifications for what that means, I don't believe that was a bad day for Israeli leadership. That's a failure. I don't know how else one describes that. And I know there's lots of work trying to attribute responsibility. I'm less concerned about that. I'm deeply concerned about what do we learn from that and take away from, and how do we make sure that never happens again. I don't believe that after October 7th, Israel, no matter who the next prime minister is, 5, 10, 20 years from now, when you have a new prime minister, I get it. There were 5 elections when I was Secretary of State. He won them all. And I don't think no matter who the prime minister is, I don't think for a long time Israel's ever going to sit second seat to anyone on decisions that they think really matters to them. And I think that's properly so.
Penultimate question. We're sitting here and some of the institutions that are benefiting from the Jew hatred that we've seen on university campuses in New York, in Boston, in California and elsewhere, some of the beneficiaries of that Jew hatred are Florida-based universities based in southern states here in the United States. Emory in Georgia, for example, is another beneficiary of that. I want to tee this question up properly. Our organization started, Mr. Secretary, by going and speaking on university campuses. And the pro, the anti, the undecided alike would come and they would ask questions. And there was virulent, clear Jew hatred on those campuses. I know because I was the initial speaker and lecturer, much to the disappointment of the audience. And I spoke to 450 campuses. And I spoke everywhere from Florida to Washington State. And in 2016, after seeing that dereliction that I spoke about in my preamble here, Rosita, my colleague, and I, we decided that actually leadership, good leadership, pro-Israel, but more importantly, pro-American leadership is actually in short supply on these campuses. They're not just anti-Israel, they're also, in many cases, anti-American. And so we made a hard pivot, and we started to bring to Israel, and that's why I'll speak about it in just a few moments, but we said, principled leadership is found beyond anywhere else in the military academies and the senior military colleges of the United States of America. These are the people. These are the people who compete for their places, who are service-oriented, who are dedicated. I will speak about it after you depart. But you are a graduate of one such institution, of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. And we're going to be expanding this initiative where we bring current and future officers for a 4-day tour of the death camps in Poland. These are not individuals of the Jewish faith, followed by a 12-day strategy and policy tour of the State of Israel. And I would like to ask you what you would say to an audience like this that's supportive of that initiative. The Lombardis are supportive of that initiative. Why do you think, if you do think, that it's worth people's while in investing in the human capital that's found in those institutions, the military academies and the military colleges?
Yeah. Again, I'm not unbiased. Although I saw there was someone here from Navy tonight. We're gonna win on Saturday. Army's gonna win. It's interesting. By the way, full disclosure too. I teach at Columbia.
Yes.
Because I want different voices there on campus. By the way, my one requirement was lots of security. But it's actually been lovely. I've been treated reasonably. We've had good, rational discussions. The other side is just wrong. It's interesting. There are many schools, not just our military academies, but ROTC programs in America as well, that do train the next generation of American leaders. And so I think it's a lovely thing that they're going to get a chance to experience something that's out of the normative place for what they do in their lives, right? We train at the military academy, we train leaders to become warriors, to serve America. Don't often get to see something like what MirYam's providing to them. And so I think it's fantastic. That exposure will matter. It will be material. Many of the young people who graduate from these institutions will be training, working, and I hope it's not true, but sometimes fighting alongside of each other as they move through their careers in service in the military. And to have had that exposure and then take it back to the larger body of fellow midshipmen or cadets or their classmates will, I think, prove incredibly beneficial for our nation. I think too, last thing I'll say about this, I think about my class of 1986. We had a few folks make general, but we had a lot of folks go out and succeed in lots of different walks of life. The current CEO of 7-Eleven, so if you get a Slurpee you don't like, you can call him. We've had folks that have gone on to become pastors and rabbis and doctors and all kinds of different things. And to have them exposed to this in their formative years when they're 18, 19, 20, 21, I think will not only filter through our leadership in our military, but leadership broadly throughout the United States as well.
And my last question for you, the Jewish people, I'm painting with a very broad brush here, but I'm going to paint nonetheless. I've noticed in the diaspora, not so much in Israel, I think in Israel they're born almost emboldened and outspoken and ready to do whatever's needed, less so in the diaspora. But they turn bold when people not of our faith, not of our number, are able to impart some certainty and some confidence, especially individuals with achievements such as yours. it doesn't feel like the business with Lebanon has been finished. It doesn't feel to me like things are finished in Gaza. It doesn't feel like things are finished in Yehuda v'Shamron, Judea and Samaria. And I think that a lot of people will be wondering about Israel's security. So what would you say to this audience about Israel's near and medium-term security in the aftermath of October 7th?
Yeah. You know, Benjamin, I feel better about it in the near term than the medium term. Okay. I think here for the next few years, everybody can still see this. It's absolutely the case. It is not finished. This work is not done. And by the way, in some sense, it never is, right? In some sense, evil will continue to roam the earth, and we all have an obligation to defend against it, both intellectually and militarily when required. But I worry about it more in the long run, because people will forget there will be something else that will come up, and October 7th will become a more distant memory for all of us. I think about the way that's happened with 9/11. I think about what happened to the generation before with Vietnam for the United States, right? Each generation passes along, and my son was born in 1990. He doesn't know these things and feel these same things than the folks who are a generation older. The next generation of young people won't remember October 7th in the same way. That's true in Israel and in America and broadly in the world. And we need to make sure two things. One, it's not that we don't forget. We need to make sure that the story is told properly, so that when the history books write this, they don't write about the victims of Gaza, right? They can't. The history, and it's. I should be a little more precise. There were victims in Gaza, right? It's true. There are civilian casualties in every war that's ever been fought, but the victims were the people of the nation-state of Israel. Though that the aggressor was the Iranian regime in the proxy of Hamas, and we need to make sure that the history books reflect that, and that requires each of us every day to talk about it in real time with our children, with our grandchildren, about it in a way that is serious and thoughtful and complete and moral. And if we do that, if we don't just kind of walk away and say, yeah, that was a mistake, that was a bad day, or oh goodness gracious, isn't it great that that's now over? We need to continue to raise it and bring it back. And if we lose that, I worry about Israel's security in the longer run. You mentioned, I think you mentioned this, right? If you'd have asked me, and I'll end with this idea. Actually, I'll end with two thoughts. If you'd have asked me 10 years ago when I entered Congress what I thought about the United Nations, I would have said it's important and we need to get it and make it better. And today I believe it ought to be eliminated. And I say that with literally no joy. I say it heartbroken that an institution that was formed in the aftermath of a world war, that had a noble mission set, but that its leadership walked away from its core charter and has no capacity to reform or fix it, to actually deliver against its stated charter. If you read that charter, you would all find joy in it. You would all find heart. It talks about human rights in ways that we would all recognize. And yet the institution has been so corrupted, is so indecent, that now we have to collectively decide what to create in its aftermath when it is gone. And that leads me to my last thought. You should know I'm deeply optimistic. I am long America in the same way that I am, that's a financial term, in the same way that I am long Israel. But it is not, and we've talked about President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu and others, but it's not because of great leaders. I hope we find great leaders. By the way, in America, we'll elect good presidents, we'll elect some not so good, and by the way, we'll sometimes disagree about which is which. But I'm long in these places because of places like this Chabad, right? Where students come learn about decency and their faith and become committed to that decency and to their faith. And it's because we've got a mayor here. He needed to be mayor like he needed a hole in his head, right? I don't know, are any of you members of your homeowners association board? I am. I'm the vice chair. I care deeply about shake shingles, right? It's those institutions that we do in our churches, in our communities, in our schools. Those are the places that I see so fundamentally different in Israel and America than any place else I saw in the world that I traveled as Secretary of State or CI Director. those communities keep us all tracking on what really matters. They keep us all focused on how it is we continue to do our duty to God and our duty to our nations. And so long as people will come out on a Wednesday night to support an institution like the MirYam Institute, right, and give of themselves and their resources and their money and their time and their love, so long as those institutions remain intact, I am very convinced that we will prevail in the essential struggles that matter so much to each of us and our families. And so thanks for having me here. Bless you all. Thank you. Benjamin, thank you.